Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Joining me tonight is my new friend, Doug. Welcome to the podcast, Doug. How are you?
Jesse, I'm great, and it's wonderful that we share that kind of allegiance and affection for Bruce and his music, which will have something to do with what we talk about tonight.
I think we will, yeah, but before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'm a 78-year-old Vietnam veteran living in part-time in Madison, Wisconsin, and I spend part of the year in Phoenix, Arizona, where I have children and grandchildren. And I grew up in the 60s, like Bruce did, like a lot of my peers, tumultuous time. And I think music of that period, of that era of our lives, had a lot to do with defining us as a generation and also helping to sustain us to get through those times. Lord knows we need it now as well. Yeah, I'm basically a guy who's written about his experiences, primarily about Vietnam and post-Vietnam, but also a lot about music and its ability to help us to connect and in some ways to heal.
Great. I'm gonna ask you a lot of questions about music and growing up. But before I started, what branch of the military did you serve in?
Yeah, I was in the U.S. Army. People only think about things in terms of Vietnam. They think about the lottery. Before that, there was a thing called the draft. When we registered for the selective service on our 18th birthday, which I did and my peers did, which Bruce Springsteen did, we were given a classification, and it was everything from 1A to 4S. 1A meaning you're very eligible, they can come and get you. 4F meaning you were physically unable to perform and everything in between marriage, soul child, running a farm, running a business, you name it. And I registered. I had a college deferment while I went to school. I was a first generation college student, a small school in West Virginia. Had my 2S student deferment, which in the old days, prior to 68, 69, I graduated from college in 69, you could keep your student deferment for graduate school. Lyndon Johnson changed that in that speech he made in 1968 when he said he wasn't running for president. Before he got to that line, he canceled deferments for everybody except doctors and dentists. So now I'm not going to law school. I'm accepted, and I think I'm going, but I'm 1A. And long story short, by that fall, I was getting drafted. I passed my physical. Lucky for me, and part of the reason I'm here, I think, is they canceled November and December draft calls, came up with something called the lottery. I didn't go into the Army until March of 1970. So I was drafted in the U.S. Army in March of 70. And again, lucky for me, again, Jesse, just the difference between November and March, they aligned my skills with what I had been. I was a writer and an English major in college. They made me a combat correspondent. So I worked at the Army Hometown News Center in Kansas City and then at command headquarters in Vietnam from 1970 and 1971.
I have a special place in my heart. My dad was 20 years military. Was he met my mom in what was then called Fort Polk, Louisiana.
That's where everybody went for for AIT when they were
Yes.
infantry. Yeah.
Yes, they were. And he then was ended up got stationed in Fort Knox and with the Gold Vault, and he was a instructor. And the story he tells, and he is now no longer with us, but he was talking to my son and, hey, Gramps, why did you join the army? The judge said you either go to jail or you can go to the army. And
That is such a perfect story and not one that it's more, you hear that more often than you would. Jimi Hendrix,
yeah,
same experience. Who would have thought? Jimi Hendrix. Son, you can go to jail 30 days, $500, or the recruiter's just down the street.
yeah. And you think about when we go to Born in USA, right? Got in a little hometown jam. I always think about that with my dad and some of the stories he talked about. He and his they he and his friends were all, because I asked him if he had trouble traveling, a lot of the problems that they had about with veterans. And now then people almost out of, when you say bless you, when someone sneezes, they say bless you. When you say in the army, they go thank you for your service. It's almost immediately, not that I'm saying people aren't sincere. I'm just saying, but I'm sure you remember, Doug, where you guys were not treated as well.
Not even close. Not
Yeah.
even close. Yep.
So I asked my dad about that, and he said, I got lucky. He said, we were, all of us were teachers at Fort Knox. We were taught. I remember he told the story once that he found out that some of the guys were just having the kids shoot all their ammunition like the first day, and then the rest of the time they sat around just drinking beer. And he said, if we're sending these kids to war, we need to teach them how, and raise hell. But he said basically, as you said, long story short, he and his friends that were all teachers, instructors, were finally like, no, we need to send these people. So he said, we all got stationed to Vietnam together. We all traveled together. So there was this, I never traveled alone. I didn't have a chance. I had my buddies with me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just always think of, and my mom said that, I don't remember. I was in the third grade when he was in Vietnam. I remember being very worried, being told, hey, he's a tank commander. A tank is very secure. And getting all these cassettes from him while he was in Vietnam. And I know after the fact that, one side of the cassette was for me and my sister, and the other half probably was for my mom
Wow.
that had a little more serious
Sure.
thoughts in it.
Sure.
Did you have family waiting for you when you were?
Just say that's a wonderful story. And I did. And the thing about that war was we couldn't email you or send a tweet. And we wrote letters.
Yeah,
And that was our connection. It was both connection and therapy. So I wrote to my folks. I wrote a little bit to my brother. I wrote to a girlfriend I had at the time. I wrote to my buddies. And even though I was in a place where all the current technology was, and some guys were sending cassettes and recording cassettes, sending them home,
yeah,
I figured my parents weren't that facile. I don't think they
yeah,
had a tape recorder.
yeah,
So it was a lot of letters. But that kind of, not just the communication, but as you said, it's one message to you and your sister. I'm fine. I'm going to get through this. Things are okay. I did this. I did that. Your mom on the other side is, this isn't so great, morale's not so good, the war is
yes,
difficult, etc., etc.
yeah,
And hey, that's how we got by. That music and our buddies, that's how we
yeah,
survived.
yeah. Dad always played the guitar and would play a lot. In fact, I remember some of my happiest memories is after he came back from Vietnam. We were back stationed in Fort Knox. My parents bought their first house, and Saturday nights, the house would be filled with so much cigarette smoke, some alcohol. My dad did not. My dad was an alcoholic, so he went through spells where he drank and didn't drink.
Yeah.
But and just four or five guitars. All of his buddies there, just picking and telling stories and laughing. And I think of that memory often. And I've often said I never learned how to play the guitar and I haven't taken
Me
time to
neither.
do it.
Yeah,
And someone told me, says, that's because you want to play guitar with your dad, Jesse. That's why you haven't taken time. And I said, you know what? I think you're right.
it's a great line. And you've just touched on something that was really essential about that war. And there's never going to be another experience like it because we had access to music. The military understood one thing. We were the rock and roll generation. That's what defined us, that's what distinguished us. Music was in our DNA. So we had guys like your dad in my hooch that play guitars and would play
Yeah.
everything from Masters of War to We Got to Get Out of This Place to Leaving on a Jet Plane
Yeah.
to everything in between.
Yeah.
And we had cassettes and radios and real tape decks. Johnny Cash came to Vietnam, Nancy Sinatra, James Brown. They knew music was
Yeah.
essential, and that's one of the good things they did. So
Yeah.
thank goodness we had guys like your dad stationed with us, and I did in my hooch, who helped us get back to that moment of these are the songs that connect us and are about us.
It really is. Thank you for indulging me a little bit talking about my dad.
That's
Um,
great.
where did you grow up? And was there a lot of music in the household when you were growing up?
Always. I think a lot of households probably did in those days, and maybe just people they're getting far enough away from
Yeah,
it to remember it. I grew up in inner city Philadelphia, working class, row houses, all World War II dads in the neighborhood. So you can imagine all the kids because
sure.
what was the most affirmation you could do getting home from the war? You had children.
Yeah.
So it was the baby boom. And my dad really, I think, aspired more than anything to be a singer. Hoboken, New Jersey, and Frank Sinatra was just up the road. He fancied himself a little bit more like Johnny Hartman. And he did some singing both before the service and in the service because he had an injury during the service and he sang at a USO club. And so he was always humming, singing, bursting into song. And I think it wasn't just who he was, but I think it was a way for him to deal with the struggles he was dealing with. You've probably heard people say this before, but I believe it. Being the son of a World War II dad, we were raised by a generation of PTSD fathers. They saw amazing, horrible, life-changing things. They didn't come home and talk about it. They went back to work. They rebuilt this country. They had families. They moved along. And my dad never talked about what he endured in the Pacific, even after I got drafted and was going to Vietnam. But I think music for him was some comfort. And so he was always singing something. My mom was the youngest of 11, an Albanian Italian family from South Philly, always an opera or aria, some wonderful opera tune that you could recall. My brother, who was 4.5 years older than I was, which means in ways, luckily for him, he escaped Vietnam,
Yeah.
um, was in Philly at the time and he was singing in doo-wop street corner groups. He went to the best dances, the police athletic dance in Philly, where all the cool kids in Philadelphia went. He was too cool to be on bandstand. He thought that was for losers. So there was always, and sometimes with cacophony. How do you get Rossini to go with Sinatra to go with Chuck Berry? But it was always there, and I felt like it was running up and down the block. That in these houses, everybody had this sort of percussion going on because music was something that we could all relate to, and in many ways, I think, connected us and comforted us.
So I know in one of the, you guys were nice enough to send me some notes, and because I've done this a lot, and I find there's two kinds of people in general terms. The people that love their parents' music, and as they start becoming a teenager and a young adult, they find their own music and add to it. And those who can't stand their parents' music till they turn 30 and then say, "Hey, you know that Johnny Cash guy dad liked a lot? He's pretty good."
Yeah.
Maybe Frank Sinatra has a little something. So you mentioned a little bit, right? Especially you and your father and you and your brother with the rock and roll and everything. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And I think a lot of it has to do with the times they were changing and what was changing in our lives. My dad had a tough upbringing. Like I said, I think probably had some stuff in the military he never
Sure.
processed. And he was struggling day to day with what dads had to do in that generation. He had to take care of his wife and kids. He had to
Yeah.
provide for them. And he had a very tumultuous work history. At the same time, here's my brother coming along, and
Hmm.
everything's perfect. The wave in his hair, the girlfriends, the cars, the music. And he was a great athlete. Everything that is ascending for my brother is descending for my father. So then you throw music into that mix, And it becomes a place where, yeah, you do make that separation. I don't think my brother, and we're different people, but ever had the appreciation for my dad's music that I do. And I did some of that then because I knew it was a way to connect with him and I
Yeah.
wanted to do that. But also, it was good.
Yeah.
Benny Goodman and Count Basie and Duke Ellington are artists. They're terrific.
Yes.
And so I was able to get to that, I think, a little bit sooner. But I do think you're right on both points. One is this was a way to disassociate, to disconnect, to say, hey, this is me and this is us.
Yeah.
I remember my dad, when he heard Over the Mountain Across the Sea by Johnny and Joe, what are these black people doing in his house?
Yeah.
He grabbed that 45 and threw it out the window.
Yeah.
Elvis, maybe they could handle, Pat Boone,
Yeah.
but Chuck Berry and Little Richard.
And my I joke a lot about growing up in and my mom was from, as I mentioned, that small town in Louisiana right outside of Fort Polk. And we listened to both kinds of music in the house, country and western, as the Blues Brothers joke. In fact, my I've made this story before, and I know people think I'm exaggerating. When I was 9 or 10, so that would have been out 68, 69, I was with my cousins in Ohio, and they were shocked I could not name all four Beatles. We didn't listen to the Beatles in my house, right? I could probably name you a dozen Buck Owens and Johnny Cash and Roy Haggard songs.
I love it.
Yeah. So growing, I know it sounds like there in Jersey, Philly area. You come back home and did you go to law school?
I never did. I got drafted out of law school, dropped out, and after that 2 years and pardon my French, the shit show that Vietnam was,
Sure.
and then what it was like at home, I just felt the law didn't save me, it didn't protect me, I couldn't. But what I did want to do was I wanted to go back and use my GI Bill, hang out on a campus, maybe find some other vets, some free spirits, grow my hair, grow a beard, and just chill out. And I did that, not exactly in the ways I expected and wanted to be able to do it. But yeah, it was just law school. What do I do? I end up marrying a lawyer, and then my daughter's a lawyer. I guess that's the way life works.
Yeah. That's I can imagine. And by the way, I agree with you that a lot of kids raised by those vets from World War II, definitely parents. And I think to a certain degree, my dad had that his own version of PTSD, right, from that Vietnam.
Yep,
And it is, I won't get on my soapbox. We could spend a whole hour about how poorly this country treats their vets.
yep.
And so let's talk Bruce a little bit. When did you discover Bruce? And can you articulate why he spoke to you? Why his music spoke to you?
Honestly, I can't think you could find a Vietnam vet who doesn't say, first of all, when Craig and I, one of the books I wrote
Yeah.
was "We Got to Get Out of This Place," the soundtrack of the Vietnam War.
Yes.
Rolling Stone named it the best music book of 2015. It's the proudest moment of my life, not because I co-wrote that,
Yeah.
but because we were able to give voice to the stories of veterans. And the way we found that was, it's what you're talking about, Jesse. We guys were 30, 35, 40 years away from their service, still hadn't talked about it. And
Yeah.
didn't weren't but when we said, not how bad is it, how much pain are you in? We said, what's your song? Whoa. And a lot of guys would talk about Brothers Under the Bridge or Born in the USA or Galveston Bay or Down in the Flood. And it was like some of them thought Bruce was a Vietnam vet
Yeah.
because he could have been. His first drummer, Bart Haynes, was killed in Vietnam. Bruce knows from the stories he's told and what he said on the record that could have been him, that he could have gone. So, that, but even before that, I recognized him even when I was before I think he became the Vietnam vet's
Yeah.
voice in many ways. I recognized the talent. I thought he was a compilation of Dylan and other great storytellers, great rock and roll, but also a guy that knew from whence he sprang, what
Yeah.
his roots were, what life was like growing up like that. So I gravitated to that. It was great music, of course, but then, man, when he started to burrow in to Vietnam and that misunderstood song by Reagan and others, I mean, Born in the USA, are you kidding me? There is not a tougher song about that treatment, that service, that environment, that situation than that song. Yeah. And I was lucky enough, I've seen him a couple times, including once when I got to shake hands with him. We were
Yeah.
supposed to have an interview about the book, but the tour got extended rather than it was the last night of the tour in Milwaukee. But
Yeah.
yeah, I have so much respect and regard for him, not just as the person he is, but the artist and the fact that, and you know this probably better than most folks, that when he first stepped from behind the curtain and wasn't just a rock and roll star and talked about something, it was that concert for the Vietnam vet in Los Angeles, and he said, I got to tell you something. As the guys in wheelchairs, Bobby Muller among them, were around the stage, you got to know this story. And he went into Who'll Stop the Rain. The guy gets it. I love him for that. And he's done a lot to support me and other vets.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to see him on Broadway. And then anyone can see it now on Netflix. And when he talks about that story of going to be drafted and how his father would say, wait till the army gets you, wait till the army gets you.
Yeah.
And then when he comes back and he's not going to go, and his dad says, that's good. And when he says, I wonder who went in my place, that's chilling.
It is powerful and it's so right. When we talk about Bone Spurs or a Clinton or anybody else,
Yeah,
you didn't go. They
yeah,
got somebody else. It wasn't like they didn't get their numbers. They had to get their
yeah,
numbers. So if you get a deferment, two deferments, two or three other guys, they went.
yes. And I imagine he has, and I'm not being an armchair psychologist, I think there's a little bit of guilt. And also, I have a guitar and I can use it to make it talk. And he tells the story of reading that book and meeting and then going. And I think he does a lot of work for food banks and a lot of work for Vietnam veterans or any veterans. And I think it's amazing.
No, and it's made a big difference. And not just to have that voice, but also to have the support. And there's some money behind that. And it was we're in a whole different cacophony now.
Yeah,
Geez, Lord knows it's going to be tough to get through. But Vietnam was the pivot point. You had to
yeah,
make a decision all the time.
yeah,
And Bruce is one of those guys that recognized that other working class kids like him, Credence did this as well. They
yeah,
knew, two of them were in the military, they knew that it was guys like them, not the senator's son, not the
yeah.
millionaire's son, not the general's son, that was going to go and do the fighting and dying.
Yeah, I do think it's ironic. And if it wasn't so sad, it would be funny that politicians, I'll keep it generic,
Yep.
play Born in the USA, play Fortunate Son, and you're like, have you ever listened to the words? Like, do you understand?
What we're talking about.
We're going to talk about the new book, but I am curious, was there a road to Damascus moment of we got to get out of this place, the soundtrack of Vietnam War? Was there this moment? What was it that drove that book?
Absolutely, great question. Craig Werner, my co-author, who was chair of Afro-American Studies here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, absolutely terrific guy, and uses music as a way to teach. So he had some of the most popular courses at the university, Black music in America, Black music in the Civil Rights Movement, jazz, and so both of my kids took his classes. Both my kids went to the UW, and they would come home talking about this really terrific guy and what he was teaching, and he would give them CDs with soundtracks on them. Eventually, I got to meet Craig. So when they teach classes and they had the big class, he had 400, 500, 600 students in his class. It was so popular. You have TAs, teaching assistants, and they have small group sessions during the week so they can break down the size and scope of the class, have 30 or 40 of them in a room. that can talk about what they're reading and what they're thinking about, maybe a question they can ask, a question they have on their mind. And occasionally, when they got to the Vietnam section of the 60s and that whole era, they would have Vietnam vets come into the small group discussion. And so I and a bunch of other Vietnam vets that I knew here were part of that contingent that were called in to talk to the students. Never meeting Craig because we're not in the big classroom. We're talking with about 30 or 40 kids in their TA. Long story short, I eventually get to meet him because of what he had done with veterans and the fact I was a veteran. We were both at the same holiday party at the Madison Vet Center, which was an offshoot of something we created in Madison that was helping Vietnam and other vets. By then, we had other vets beyond Vietnam vets in their transition. So I go over to Craig, thank him for being a great teacher, tell him about my kids, and we start talking. And he asked me what I thought of the songs that he had on the playlist about Vietnam. And so what I said to Craig was, you got to remember Vietnam was about when you were there, where you were, and what you did. And so I'm 1970 and 1971. I'm in the rear. I'm a combat correspondent. I'm a journalist. My soundtrack's different than a guy that's a grunt, than a guy that's driving a tank like your dad, that somebody's riding helicopters. And so then he asked me, what were some of your songs? And when I started to give him a little bit, all of a sudden there were 7 or 8 vets crowding around us saying, what about this song? What about this? This was my song. And Craig and I, even though we just met, we exchanged this look like something's going on here. There's something's happening. We got together later over a beer on the Union Terrace and we talked and we said, there's a book. And, it became this marvelous book that it did, mainly because of the veterans and their stories. But that was what happened. I mean, it was just that moment when we knew that music was so essential to these guys being able to talk about what they experienced that we had to do it.
So I have a good friend of mine who doesn't do this anymore, and I'm sitting here thinking I wish he would. His name is Terry Smith. He is retired Microsoft. He now lives in Scotland. And for a while, he was doing a podcast called Music Talks. And the premise is you pick a song from every decade you've been alive. Like I was born in 59, so I picked a song in the 50s, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, go on and on.
Wow.
And using those songs, he would interview the person and basically you would tell the story of your life via song. It was absolutely beautiful. And I'm sitting here thinking, I wish he was still doing this because you would be a great guest.
I
Okay.
wish he was too, because that's basically the book that's out now that I just
Yeah.
completed. It's being published, and it's called The Tracks of My Years, which is
Yeah.
a takeoff on the Smokey and the Miracles song title,
Right.
The Tracks of My, and it is all that. It
Yeah.
is here's a song, World in a String with Frank Sinatra, Fire and Rain with James Taylor, On the Road to Find Out, Cat Stevens, Ripple by
Yeah.
the that it's at a moment, it's one of those flexion points in my life. And this is exactly what he's now. I don't have the wherewithal he did to find the artist and ask them about the song.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Jesse, you've got your soundtrack, he's got his,
Yeah.
our
And
families have theirs, and music is this thing that is always going to be there. I think when we start to lose our wherewithal, like with dementia or Alzheimer's, if it hopefully it doesn't
yeah.
happen, but that's what the brain research is showing now. You play a song, those folks are there.
Yeah. It is a time machine. And you hear that song, you're back to that place, that memory. And so you, I want to go back. When did you decide? You talked about you had your English degree and you came
Yeah.
back, decided the law wasn't for you. And after writing in the military, did you decide you wanted to keep writing?
I had to keep writing because it was what enabled me to stay sane and to
Yeah.
deal with what I was dealing with. I think it did a lot of that for me, even when I was younger, had some ups and downs in high school.
Yeah.
Writing was a way for me to get my way through that. College, as you said, because of what I did and who I was. And of course, I had that social chairman gig, which was amazing, and the acts that we had at that small school. But then in Vietnam, a matter of survival, the letters home, the journal. And so it wasn't like writer with a capital W, but it was almost like writer as survivor. And and then it's just lucky for me that I was in the situations I was in. I knew the people I did. I was doing the work I did, and I was in a writing group, a veterans writing group, in fact, that I started to make this into stories, to make it into something that other people could read and share and maybe learn from. And I'm still doing it. Here I am pushing 80, and
Yeah.
I'm probably not going to stop.
What was your first, was the Vietnam soundtrack your first book?
No, it was my second. I did a thing. And again, this is one of those things that people forget about Vietnam. Almost 3 million of us served.
Yeah.
Almost 10 million of us served during that era out of 27 million who were draft eligible. That's
Yeah.
a pretty big chunk.
Yeah.
And but only about 500,000, and it's not to denigrate that service. The guys who are in combat, that is war at its worst. That's what it
Yes.
was about. Another 250,000 of us were support troops. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, it's more 2.5 million of us. I wrote the stories. Somebody made their meals. Somebody flew their helicopter. Somebody gave them orders. Somebody made their uniform. So the
Yeah.
ratio was 1 to 6 or 7. And so what I decided was nobody really knew the story about life in the rear. Now, of course, that has a lot to do with my life in the rear, 70 and
Yeah.
71, working with the brass in the air conditioned jungle because they wanted air conditioning. So I wrote a book called Deros Vietnam Dispatches from the Air Conditioned Jungle. And then we got to get out of this place. And then a follow up to that called Who'll Stop the Rain. Can't get away from, from good music titles.
No, well,
Um,
think that's perfect.
yeah,
I'm also right. Roger Staubach
yeah.
famously West Point and then served in Vietnam. And the I sure you guys have your own share of mixed emotions of happy that you're in the air conditioned jungle, but also worried about your brothers and sisters that were in a lot worse place.
No, yeah, you couldn't put it better. And that's the thing. You were talking about Bruce before. Maybe there's a little residual guilt. He could have been Bart Haynes. He could have been the
Yeah,
guy that was drafted. Same for us. I'm lucky. And again, you'll hear a lot of Vietnam vets talk about just fate or fortune or good
yeah,
luck or whatever, or bad luck. And a heap of survivor guilt, which I think probably was more integral to whatever PTSD I had when I got back than anything. Not that I
yeah,
was kill or be killed situations, but just that I knew there were guys that did. One of the guys in my office got killed. The only reporter from my office killed in Vietnam.
wow.
Could have been me. I could have gone up and covered that story, but he got the assignment and he did it. So,
Mm.
yeah, I think you just know that it wasn't to be for me. It was for Steve. It was for somebody else.
So yeah, we're talking about the tracks of my years, a music-based memoir. Why tell your story now?
It's a good question. I think it's because I've been telling it for a long time, and it was finally my time to say, okay, there was Vietnam, and there was me before and after Vietnam, but what about music and that mosaic, that tapestry, that history that brought me to who I am? And I just and again, I told you that prompt of having a writing group when
Yeah,
you have to bring something to the table every week. And these are guys, many of whom in the early portion, it was all vets that you didn't want to let down. You didn't want to let
yeah,
these guys down. For some guys, this was the first time they could bare their soul. And so I got to do that too. And when I didn't have something that was going into one of the books or one of the ideas I had, what became was a music-based memory. I would come in with something that I heard a song, like you were saying, The Fortunes, You've Got Your Troubles. Who remembers that song? It's not that great a song, not the best British invasion song, but it's got a connection to me and my daughter when she was 2 years old and I was a stay-at-home dad that resonates. So, yeah, I think it just became a matter of I'd done all this soul searching and sifting and winnowing. I'm getting pretty close to who knows how much time's left. Why not put some cover? And again, it was Craig, my colleague, and we got to get out of this place, who said, I was trying to write one story. I was coming in with all these music-based memories. He said, just put them together. The story about high school, the story about Vietnam, the story about who you are, put some covers on it and just get it done.
And I love that the book has a soundtrack. Not only in the title, but you sent me a link. You have a Spotify playlist that the Dylan did this a few years ago where he did a book of different songs he loved. And I remember if I wasn't, I would listen to the song and then go to Dylan's book and read about his thoughts on it. I think this is wonderful. So, where's the book available?
The book is available at any place people want to buy a book. Of course, Amazon. It's a small publisher, wonderful people called Legacy Book Press that I
Yeah,
happened to come across. They're based in Iowa, lovely people, but they don't have a big marketing budget. There's a Ingram warehousing that independent bookstores can order it from.
yeah,
It's available online. There's a Kindle edition already out. The big push comes next week. People can get a book wherever they can get a book. And I think, put it up against their own soundtrack because they probably have one.
yeah. And publication date is
It's August 5th officially.
okay.
Um, so that's just coming right up,
Yes.
or whenever the show is going to be on. But August 5th of 2025. And what's really cool, and Jesse, you'd appreciate this because you love
Yeah,
the music, is that rather than launching the book at a bookstore, I love bookstores, especially
yeah.
independent bookstores, but I'm launching the book in Madison at a music venue. And I'm going to have a friend of mine who plays guitar and has backed me up a little bit before to play a little bit of the songs that are in the soundtrack,
Good.
and I'll tell the story from the book. What's better than music and words?
They can't be any better. So, Doug, do you have a story you want to share from the book? We don't want to give everything away, but
Sure.
is there one specific you might want to share as a teaser?
I think I referenced that story about my daughter and the beginning of that. I think there's a couple that really keep coming back to me. And I think one of those was when I was back home and I was trying to figure out what was going on in America, what was going to happen to me, what was going on with vets. The war was still going. And I went to find my old buddy from law school, the guy that was going to be my roommate. He was my college roommate and he was going to be my
Mhm.
law school roommate. He joined the reserves. I got drafted and spent in the Army. And I went up to see him in North Scituate. He was going to Boston University Law School. And we went out to see an old buddy of ours who both went to college with, who was living in Nantucket
Yeah,
off the Cape. And the couple of days I had there when the harbor froze, so we couldn't get out. So we were stuck there. And it was great for me because it was like, isn't everything frozen in time anyway? Can I just stay still here for a moment, not get in my
yeah,
car and keep driving to try and figure out what's behind me and what's ahead of me? And that Cat Stevens song of On the Road to Find Out, which is on T for the Tillerman album, just it spoke to me. It was like, I'm on my way. I'm trying to figure this out and maybe I'll get there. But I got to ask a lot of questions. I have to do a lot of self-examination. I got to look to the people that are next to me or the people that I'm going to encounter down the road. And I think it was just this notion, not just of searching, but finding but really, at least for that period of time, and this is like now I'm in 1972, I got out of back from Vietnam, late 71. If I hadn't had that, I don't know if I would have made it.
yeah,
And again, it was a song, just a song.
yeah. Do I love that? I love that so much. Doug, what's next for you? You're going to obviously be promoting this book, but what is something you haven't done you want to do?
Boy, that is a great question. I think it's time for me to stop passing the buck on this. My wife can play the piano and the guitar. My son plays the guitar. I'm going to probably have to figure out how to play an instrument. So
Okay.
if I'm going to stay true to this thing that I love so much, I'm going to have to sit down with a guitar or a piano or a harmonica or a flute
Yeah.
and learn how to do something with what I love.
I I applaud that and I'm the same way. I keep thinking about I should get a ukulele because there's only four strings. Maybe that'd be a little easier. Doug, this has been a joy.
Same here.
I have loved your stories. Tracks of My Tears, a music-based memoir. Doug Bradley, available everywhere where there's books. Available on August 5th. The Kindle is available already. I will tell you, I just bought it while we were talking. I clicked on Amazon. I can't wait to read it.
Great.
And I want you to come back and we'll tell more stories, okay?
I'd be glad to, Jesse. I appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, I think you're going to find some good ones in there to share. And I'm sure some of the ones that might make it on your soundtrack. So thank you so much.
Very nice. If someone wants to reach you, what's the best way?
I've got a website. It's really one of these funny things you have to do. You want to Google Doug Bradley Vietnam because there's another Doug Bradley who is a British, it's his stage name. I think his real name's Clive Barker, but
Yeah.
he took the name and he's Pinhead in all the Hellraiser movies. So, so you got to do Doug-Bradley.com or just Google Doug Bradley Vietnam. You'll find me.
That's funny. It's wow. Jesse, did you know that guy was also Pinhead? What a thing.
No.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, brother.
I've loved visiting with you. Everyone, go check out the book. I'm gonna buy a couple of them, and I think this Tracks on My Ears sounds amazing. And in honor of my dad, I think I'm gonna have to get the We Got to Get Out of This Place. So thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
listeners. Be safe, be kind, and we'll talk soon. Goodbye.